Hello. We're talking about the cost of death on today's Money 101 with Jane Dutton. Apparently, South Africa is one of the most expensive countries in the world to die in. But why? I mean, how can you justify that? I received a deluge of emails from people in South Africa and abroad who want to know more about this topic. So let's listen in. Thelma Battis, thank you for joining us all the way from Costa Rica, and thanks for getting in touch where you raised some concerns about what happens when someone dies, what happens to their estate and their will. Tell me more.
When you are abroad, especially in Costa Rica, which is 24 hours flying to South Africa, and you have a parent that dies and there's COVID, you then don't know what goes on with the estate, who helps with the estates, who does the death certificates. It's very difficult to find honorable people to assist you and help you. Where do you go to for help in instances like this? Where do you get people to assist you with burying your parents? There are many people that are out there, but because you are so far away overseas, there are great issues getting people to do what they've promised to do.
I should imagine it's also quite hard getting your hands on insurance or retirement funds that might be out there.
It's very difficult because if you don't have the retirement fund policy numbers and so forth, you can go to certain sites and they ask you to access the site and give the policy numbers or the person's name, and then they say they can't give that because how do they know that you're a relative, and how do you go and say you're a relative? You can't just go to a local police station to do something like that. So it's a very difficult thing if you don't have somebody dedicated to assisting expats with parents or family members, direct family members that have passed away.
Good questions. We'll hopefully get them answered. Thelma, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Skulk Milan, CEO of Bright Rock, joins me. Thank you very much for coming in.
Hello, Jane. Yes.
You were listening to what Thelma was saying. I mean, quite a concern, isn't it, when you're that far away? How best should she go about getting the information that's needed?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of routes, Jane, and firstly I want to say it is a challenge that I think many South Africans, many families are facing these days. It's the world's become a village. So a couple of options available to her. If she knows about what policies and there is a specific policy at a specific insurance company, the best route really to engage directly with the claims department. They are geared often to be able to help case by case. They can engage. You're talking to a person. It's not just a number. The other routes also to work either through a financial advisor. You know, if there's not a financial advisor that the family knows or have been appointed, you can definitely engage with some, you can find an appropriate financial advisor. And there are many around, whether you're part of a company, find a financial advisor through a group in that or a referral. Because those guys also and girls knows how to navigate the corridors and know how to find the answers for you.
And I know it's stating the obvious, but those policies need to be known. That information needs to be shared, not necessarily the number, but you need to know what's out there.
Quite definitely. And that's why, if you know and going direct to the insurance company, that's one route. But quite often, as you rightly say, you maybe don't know what you don't know. And that's why there are tools available to financial advisors. There's a database that advisors use to track all your policies for your specific life. It's called Astute. So if you contact and engage with an advisor, you could probably first go and do that check to see if there are not any other policies, because it's not just the life cover policies. It might be any remaining retirement or savings policies that haven't yet matured.
So that'll reveal all the policies.
That will reveal. So that's why I think going through that financial advisor route should be considered, even if you know that's a specific policy and I can engage with the life insurance company in question.
Because I should imagine when you live overseas, you can't rock up at a police station and try and verify who you are. It's not going to really work that way. Yeah. And she also raises the concern about how you find somebody who is going to do the job properly.
Yes.
Reputable person.
Yeah. So in my mind, if in her case, expat, hopefully she's got somebody that she can maybe get a referral from to say if there's a financial advisor in South Africa that could potentially assist. And also keep in mind, a good lawyer firm could also provide that similar similar support and assistance if she works through a lawyer. And then another option is just, some research on the web as well. There's a number of reputed financial services groups and brokerage businesses that will definitely be able to assist and support. Now, there's definitely steps to follow because it's now after the fact. Mandates need to be signed. There might be an executor already appointed or not of the estate. And those questions will come up, to be able to be answered. And if there's an executor that's been appointed to that estate operating in South Africa, it might be through a bank or even from a legal side. That's also another avenue to engage because they might also be able to provide an appropriate referral. So first port of call, try and speak to somebody that's knowledgeable about the industry. I think if you it is a complex world. I mean, financial services products is very complex to navigate through on your own. You need the help. I mean, that's the bottom line.
How often should you renew your policies and review them?
Yeah, look, and all of us, are probably guilty of not doing it as often as we should. And I'm in the industry, and I can probably criticize myself to start with. But key is preferably annually, if you can do that. If not that, it's critical to find to have the discipline to say if something changed in your life. Jane, so for example, you changed your job and your income has changed, or you got a new baby in the family. Those change moments. I mean, at Bright Rock, we like to refer to those as change moments, events that require you to rethink things. Those are times that you want to engage with a financial advisor, and they have got the expertise and they might restructure it. The other key thing, just to point out on that, reviewing your financial plan is you've got to be able to talk about it. It doesn't help you've got the best financial plan and policy and it's hidden away either on a Dropbox folder or somewhere in a file. You've got to be able to talk to your loved ones.
Family members.
Your family members should know. Your loved ones should know about it. Even if you write it down in a specific way that you give instructions to them, that for me is absolutely critical. And we've all been through that, through families that have been through that event where those affairs are not as well laid out possibly and the time it takes.
And obviously it's a sensitive topic. You don't want to bring that up, but actually you have to because you don't want to leave your loved ones scrambling after your estate.
It is a traumatic event to start with, so the worst you want is to put extra stress on the situation. And I think and it's small things that change that makes a big difference. If you look at a product that actually could pay an immediate payment out to the families, and now we're not talking the full payment, it's simply just to help with those funeral costs, because keep in mind the first step typically is how do you arrange a funeral? And if you 10 or 12,000 kilometers away, that's an even bigger challenge, and so much worse if there are no funds available, to do that immediately.
So how do you arrange a funeral? I was shocked to hear how expensive they are. I mean, you sent me a number saying up to 50,000. This is an advance payment for funeral expenses, when generally it seems that funerals are around 23K. Why so expensive?
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of procedures that needs to be followed. There's a lot of knowledgeable, work that goes into it.
Like what?
So, for example, to prepare the death certificates, to make sure that it's registered with Home Affairs, and also the facilities. If you think about, whether it be a crematorium, whether it be, the making sure that the ability to run a funeral, so, the hearse, the arrangement of the funeral, those things are all very expensive to maintain, to ensure, to establish. And people have to be trained appropriately to deal with the situation. If you think about just the storage facilities for the remains, and it's, at Bright Rock we see, we engage a lot with our funeral parlours, and it's especially in the last 2 years of the pandemic, they've never been more important and for performing a critical function, more pressure on them. And to give you a practical example, whether you're overseas or even just in South Africa the last 2 years, you couldn't necessarily get your loved one on a passing. And a lot of families couldn't be there present at the cremation, or maybe just a small contingent. So a lot of that had to happen remotely already to a great deal. And it's been hugely challenging for a lot of families. We saw it, but luckily, if you work with a reputable funeral home. They understand how to do it. They, and they can be as sensitive as they can. I mean, they've got, unfortunately, have to perform the function of dealing with that last few steps of the individual. Quite important. I mean, a product that can release that automatically, because what you don't want is you don't want the funds to be captured into an estate, and that's a whole process, as we know, 6 months, 2 years, depending on the complexity. So you want to make sure that money can be available literally within 48 hours.
You touched on estate. I know somebody who died 5 years ago. The estate hasn't been wrapped up yet. I mean, that's inexcusable, isn't it? Because every year or every month, however long it takes, it costs. The money comes from that estate. What should people in that sort of situation do? How can you expedite the process, and what sort of money are they looking at losing in this type of case?
Yeah, look, I think in the 5 years is absolutely the exception. So one would have to assume there's either been a conflict between parties in terms of demands on the estate. There could be a situation where the support, the council, there was some challenges on that front. It was a challenged estate, and you will find those exceptions. I think for the guy that's or man or woman out there that wants to make sure that doesn't happen, I think key to that is try and have your estate as simplified and streamlined as possible, if I can use that turn of phrase, in terms of make sure, as I mentioned earlier, policies are paid into the beneficiaries. Make sure that you've got a very clear will that maps out, what do you want to achieve with your passing, with your estate.
I know some banks offer wills.
Yeah.
Are those adequate enough? I think it's something like 250 Rand a year, but they're pretty basic, aren't they?
Yeah, no, look, and probably for a large chunk of the population, it's more than sufficient. My view is that the moment that you start building up a sizable estate and you've got family and a dependents, if it's maybe just a very small group, that could probably suffice. But if it's a large family, a lot of dependents, a couple of businesses even perhaps in there, spend the time, spend the effort, sit down with your accountant, sit down with a legal counsel to really put something robust together. It just makes the job so much easier and gives you peace of mind as well, Jane.
Madeline wrote to us. She asked this: when it comes to generational wealth, trusts are expensive. SARS is closing the loopholes. What about starting a company that invests in shares and the directors change to your kids, for example, instead of a trust? Similar concept, different structure. When you die, you simply remove from the board of directors, no wealth tax. But what are the other issues?
Yeah, so definitely, a lot of families used the various structures. So, for example, it might start with a trust and a company operating underneath that trust that's wholly owned, like an investment company that they operate in. The benefit with a company is it allows more commercial engagement and leeway. You can operate more commercially within a company than a trust, just by virtue of just how it's structured and that. You can definitely change, as it's stated there in terms of change shareholding and that. The problem with a company is, keep in mind, shareholding is some individual entity has to own the shares in that company. Okay, so it's not so easy just to change shareholding. You can change directors, but let's say the shares were owned by let's say the father or the mother, and there's value in those shares. You can't just simply transfer it to your kids without a transaction, which obviously could incur capital gains tax, etc. So that's why a trust still can operate, because there's beneficiaries. You can nominate those beneficiaries and it operates. So a lot of people actually structure a company with a trust owning those shares.
I was shocked, but possibly not surprised, that South Africa is one of the most expensive countries in the world to die in. Why is that? And knowing how expensive it is to die, from the 50,000 Rand up that needs to be immediately released, how much of your salary should you put aside every month? Is there a percentage that you work on?
Yeah, look, I think if you talk about death, the process of death and that, there's many considerations. It's not just the funeral. The funeral is, I think, a key one, but you got to worry about Are you going to incur state duty liability? If your estate's larger than 3.5 million, you can't necessarily defer it to your spouse if you have a spouse in place. So your state duties apply, and that could be costly on the family. And also, in those cases, you don't necessarily want to liquidate your assets. You might be having you might have a wonderful property portfolio, a business running, a going concern. You don't want to go and sell that to just pay your state duty. So a life insurance policy in that case would be critical. But for me, quite often what people don't think about is your dependents, that leave behind that still would have been dependent, whether it be your spouse, your children that's still dependent on you. So quite often that's the biggest chunk of need that needs to be thought about. And people then need to think about, is that lump sum of death cover that I have in place sufficient to, let's say, cover my children and my spouse for the next 10, 20, 30 years, for as long as I might have been having to provide for them. And that needs to be considered. At BrightRock, we've got a product that really focuses on that. We call it the future paychecks, that really calculates that exactly for you. If I compare South Africa to other countries, because that was the other part of your question, it's quite challenging because I think South Africa, and those are the realities, a lot of things are left over to the individual. The state doesn't necessarily take care of that. The state wouldn't take care of the dependents in the way that you might see in other European countries or even the US. Although I think a lot of that's also changing as life continues. So I think that's driving a lot of it, why cost of death in South Africa is quite an expensive exercise.
Okay. All right. If you had to give 5 pointers, the most important things to think of, what would they be?
Make sure you get the right and appropriate financial advice. There is no doubt. You got to make sure that you've got that. Secondly, I would actually take also a bit more ownership on understanding my financial plan. So take a real interest. Own that plan yourself. Don't just rely on advisors. Understand, do I have enough, too little? Do I need more cover? Understand what is it going to be doing. Do I have dependents that I need my income? So point number 2, take ownership of your plan. Make it your own. Number 3, make sure that people understand what is your will. It doesn't necessarily even have to be that formal will that you put down. It's also just a clear communication with your family of what you require. So make sure your will is clear and legally robust. Number 4, I think have due regard to think through the process. Plan with support, with dependents. Make sure you thought through the steps that would be required.
Thank you very much, Skalk Milan. Obviously, death is a tricky and sensitive subject to tackle, but clearly a very important one. If there are any issues that you want us to look at, please get in touch with me, jane@biznews.com. I'll see you next time.